Hello, everyone. This is Brother Michael, and we start a new saint today, Venerable Pierre Toussaint. And as you can see on the image to your left, he has a pair of scissors in his hand. Now, we've seen someone of a similar profession before in Saint Martin, and you probably have figured out by now that Venerable Pierre Toussaint, just like Saint Martin de Porres, was a barber, or in specifically Pierre Toussaint's case, he was used the term hairdresser as he took care of women's hair more so than men's hair. So we start there with the profession that he will eventually pursue when he travels to New York City. But before we begin his journey there is somewhere else we must begin. So let us take a look at where Venerable Pierre Toussaint will start his story. Now we take a look at the early life of Pierre Toussaint. He was born on the 27th of June in 1766 in a place called Saint-Domingue, or as we know today, Haiti. Haiti at that time was a wealthy colony under the control of France, and they took in many products, one being probably cotton and sugarcane, among other prosperous produce that grew there. And slavery was commonplace at that time, and the practice was not too pleasant for those who were enslaved. But Pierre Toussaint has a different story to tell, and how his experience of slavery shaped him as a person and really shaped him as a Catholic man. So we want to look at that on our next slide. Many of us know from our understanding of history that slavery was not pleasant for many, and slaves were not treated well by their plantation owners or their slave owners. This was not the case for Pierre Toussaint. Pierre Toussaint, master, his name was Jean Berard, as you see on the first point there. And the way that Pierre Toussaint contributed to the plantation owned by Monsieur Berard was in the capacity of a house slave. So he would serve the family, serve their meals, and things of that nature. So Monsieur Berard was a very different breed of person. He treated his slaves with respect, treated them like human beings, and Pierre Toussaint was definitely very grateful for that. And as we'll see, that gratitude is not only seen in here, in the way that he's treated now, but his example later on in his life will also show how greatly he loved the Berard family. He was taught the Catholic faith by his grandmother, and she also taught him to read and write, so she educated him. And the skills that his grandmother, Pierre's grandmother, taught him are going to stay with him for the rest of his life. His ability to read and write, his faith are going to be rooted within him. They're not going to be shaken, and he's going to use these gifts given by his grandmother for good, and he's going to impart the wisdom that he learned from her on future generations. Another great gift that the Berard family provided to Pierre was the extensive use of their library, which provided Pierre with lots of education beyond his wildest dreams. And it was there, obviously in his being taught by his grandmother, that he would also learn to love reading and love to learn about new things. And he uses this for good in the future when he eventually will open up an orphanage for underprivileged people and provide them with education that they need as well. So he's going to use these talents that he has been bestowed with, and he's going to use them for good and impart that wisdom that he's been given to many others throughout his lifetime. And Haiti is not going to last for long. A revolution broke out, causing the Berards to take Pierre and his sister Rosalie to the Big Apple, New York City. And in New York City, Pierre would pursue a new occupation. He would apprentice as a hairdresser. As we saw on the first slide, he was holding a pair of scissors, which foretold us of what he would pursue. And he was very successful at it. He really picked it up, and he gained many customers and customers of significant wealth as well. And I want you to take note, so write this down, of one of the customers. And he had a customer who was the granddaughter. Again, this is the granddaughter of Alexander Hamilton. The granddaughter of Alexander Hamilton. Unfortunately, things are going well in New York, but Monsieur Berard wanted to make sure that Haiti was doing okay, specifically his plantation. And when he was over there, he did not survive, as he died of a disease known as pleurisy, and that's spelled Pleurisy, pleurisy, and it's a disease that affects the lungs. So it's a respiratory disease that he was afflicted with. Again, that's pleurisy, Pleurisy. And trouble is going to keep on appearing for the Berards, as we'll see in just a moment. So when Monsieur Berard passed away, it left the family in financial trouble. So when they moved to New York City, they did not plan to stay there for a long time. They were intending to go back to Saint Domingue, later known as Haiti, pretty shortly after, maybe a few months, not for the long term, because living in New York back then cost a lot of money. As we know today, it costs a lot of money to live in New York as well. So Pierre Toussaint was not oblivious to this. He was very attentive to the family. He was very concerned for the family. So what he did is he offered his earnings as a hairdresser, and he was, again, as we said, he was very successful, having many wealthy customers. He offered his money to the family. So generous, so selfless. And even though he didn't need to continue being a slave, he could have bought his freedom with all the earnings that he was making. He did stay on as a slave for the Berard family, particularly for Madame Berard, as she was really in dire straits. He really put the family first and didn't really consider his own wants and desires at this time. He was completely selfless. We might even say he was a fool for Christ in this sense, not considering what he wants, but only what others, as we saw with Brother Juniper when we were talking about Senor Nipro Serra, completely selfless, not thinking about himself, only concerned for the family, particularly Madame Berard, Mr. John Berard's wife, who really needed assistance at this time, and selfless Pierre, the way he was just so generous to the family in their dire time of need. A look at a day in the life of Pierre Toussaint. So we've spoken about this a little bit about his spiritual life. He was educated in the Catholic faith by his grandmother, and he didn't forget about that. He would start each day by attending 6 o'clock Mass at St. Peter's on Barclay Street. And that should be familiar to us because we know someone else who went to St. Peter's on Barclay Street, who we spoke about, and that person is St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. I'll definitely take note of that. Mark that down. That St. Elizabeth Ann Seton and Pierre Toussaint both attended Mass and services at St. Peter's on Barclay Street. And after Mass, Pierre would walk to each of his hair appointments because, due to the color of his skin, he was not allowed to ride in horse carriages. But as we've seen before with many of the saints, and it makes me think of St. Martin de Porres and the way that he was treated by the government and by society because of his skin color, Pierre responded in a similar way as St. Martin would have. He didn't resent it. He didn't dwell on it. He didn't really even think about it seems, because he realized there's more important things. And again, as we've seen already, he's so selfless. He doesn't think about his own self and his own feelings and how he's doing, but he really cares about others. Same with Saint Martin. And Pierre, he was working really hard. He was working 16 hours a day. He was either walking or he was working. So putting a lot of man hours. Again, he's really supporting the Berards at this time, who are in real dire straits financially. And when he returned home after a long day's worth of work, he would usually bring some sort of baked good for Madame Berard, trying to lift her spirits. Again, things were tough. Losing your husband, having to worry about financial things, but Pierre really did his best to provide for the family, so they didn't have to think about those things too much. Again, really thinking about other people was what Pierre is all about. Really, he was just so generous in so many ways. We just saw Pierre Toussaint is a very selfless person. Another example of his selfless nature is how he treated additional people other than the Berard family. He had bought his sister's freedom, his sister Rosalie. And as we have already said before, he was a great help in financial support to Madame Berard and the whole Berard family, and he stayed on as a slave until her passing. And before we continue, I really want to make clear one thing, is even though Pierre Toussaint was obviously the breadwinner and providing for the family, financially speaking, he didn't make that known to other people. And it just adds to his selfless nature of it's about others. It's not about me. So even though he was definitely contributing so greatly to the family, he didn't expect to get any credit for it. So no one knew really that Pierre was the one who was paying all the bills and supporting the family. Again, it just adds to the selfless nature that is Pierre Toussaint. And shortly before Madame Berard passed away, she, in written form, provided Pierre Toussaint his freedom on the 2nd of July in 1807. And his story doesn't end here. He doesn't, he makes a lot of money. He's doing very well, but he does more. He does more selfless things with his life, and that just seems to be the way he always thinks. Selfless, so selfless. Bum bum ba da, bum bum ba da, bum bum ba da 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 da. As you could probably guess, wedding bells are now ringing for Pierre Toussaint. Age 41, no longer having responsibility to the Berard family, he feels free now to marry someone else from Haiti in 1811, and that person is Juliette Noel. So now we take a look at additional charitable endeavors that Pierre Toussaint was a part of. Obviously, he was so charitable in his service to the Berard family for so many years. And before we continue with some specific examples on the slide, I want to take a look at something that's not on our slides. And that person is Euphemia. That's Euphemia. And Euphemia is the daughter of Rosalie, who is Pierre's sister. And Rosalie died of tuberculosis, leaving Euphemia without a family. So, as we've seen before with Pierre, such a charitable and giving person, Pierre and Juliette, his wife, took in Euphemia as their own daughter. And Pierre personally offered her education, teaching her how to read and write, just like he was taught by his own grandmother, and even provided music lessons for her at his own cost, so that she could be fruitful and pursue that life, which she greatly enjoyed. Additionally, the Toussaints opened an orphanage for black children, and the education that was offered was in the form of reading and writing and other basic education, but also the opportunity to learn a trade. So a trade might be carpentry or plumbing or painting, all sorts of different trades that can be used in your daily living and provided to society in various ways. And at this orphanage, the Toussaints were aided by a certain group, and that group was the Sisters of Charity. So Mother Seton was in Maryland, but she sent up some Sisters of Charity. So take a note of that. At the orphanage, Sisters of Charity helped the Toussaints in running the educational aspect to it, and helping the children as well. So they were definitely a great asset with that. Pierre also, as we've seen before with his sister, and he also offered his freedom of his wife as well, paid for her. He anonymously purchased the freedom of many slaves. Again, so selfless, not seeking any credit for himself, but just to help people. Just to help. Additionally, medically speaking, he helped out during an outbreak of yellow fever. And when this yellow fever broke out, Pierre, he would, where no one else would go to homes, and they just abandoned people to save themselves, so to speak. Pierre would go into quarantined areas, and he would offer help in any way he can to the sick. So definitely see another similarity here with Saint Martin de Porres, when plague victims wasn't allowed to go and help the brothers who were sick or other people who were sick. He would walk through locked doors to help those people, even though he was putting himself at great risk. So again, definitely both selfless people found in Pierre Toussaint and also in Martin de Porres. Pierre Toussaint passed away on June 30, 1853, at the age of 87, 2 years after his wife passed away. At the parish funeral, St. Peter's on Berkeley Street, where, as we know, Elizabeth Ann Seton and Pierre Toussaint attended, the funeral mass was packed with people. And it's important to note that the people were made up of the rich and the poor. So he helped many people. So he helped the rich, obviously, by providing them with services of the hairdresser, and also something also important to note, and we'll talk about it again in a little bit, is that even though he would go from home to home, as he said, he walked from place to place as a hairdresser, and people appreciated that he wouldn't gossip. Maybe he heard something, he wouldn't say anything about it. He would do his work, and he would do it well, and he was just a kind-hearted person. And same with the poor, as we saw just a moment ago with the charitable things that he did for those who were less fortunate. He offered so many opportunities for people who were in need. So he really touched people of all walks of life in the way he carried himself. And he leaves quite a legacy, Pierre Toussaint. So now we look at some things we've seen before. So as we saw, Pierre Toussaint was a daily churchgoer, 6 a.m. Mass, St. Peter's on Barclay Street, and the way that he conducted his business, he was just so kind, genuine, never gossiped, and his customers would call him Saint Pierre for his good nature. As we saw with the Berards, he put their needs before his, and as he did, and not just with them, he put his own needs before uh, many people. And additionally, Pierre Toussaint is considered the father of Catholic charities in New York. We now look at Venerable Pierre Toussaint's journey toward canonization. In 1989, Archbishop of New York, John Cardinal O'Connor, was a great supporter of Pierre Toussaint's cause for canonization. Cardinal O'Connor had documentation gathered and sent to the Vatican, and Pierre Toussaint was granted the title Servant of God, which, as we know, means someone who lived a life pursuing God's will. As part of the canonization process, Cardinal O'Connor had Pierre Toussaint's body exhumed, meaning his body was removed from his resting place, and Pierre Toussaint was reinterred in the Cathedral of St. Patrick in the crypt beneath the main altar. And this is a very unique place of burial because this crypt has primarily been reserved for bishops of the Archdiocese of New York. Pierre Toussaint is the only layman to be buried in this crypt. So it's a quite a statement that Cardinal O'Connor was making here of the importance that Pierre Toussaint has, particularly in the state of New York, but for the whole wide universal church, as an example for all of us to follow. Now we look at how the process of canonization continues for Pierre Toussaint. In 1996, Pierre Toussaint would be granted the title of Venerable by His Holiness Pope John Paul II, after a thorough investigation of his life. As we know, someone who is venerable either lived a life of heroic virtue, which means he or she lived out the theological or cardinal virtues. Number 2, was martyred, or 3, offered his or her life, as we had seen through the example of Saint Gianna Molla. And this is the example that Pierre Toussaint sets for us. Though he was born a slave, his love for God and neighbor transcended both race and nationality. He certainly lived a life of heroic virtue. Pierre touched the lives of many people. As we saw before, rich and poor alike came to the funeral of Pierre Toussaint for a reason. He touched many people in various ways, no matter which walk of life they might have been living. It didn't matter to him. Everyone is a child of God, and Pierre Toussaint absolutely knew that that was the case for each and every person that he met. And to summarize, we look at our quick facts here. As we know, Pierre Toussaint is of Haitian ancestry. He was born into slavery in 1766. He worked in New York City as a hairdresser, and Pierre Toussaint is the first black venerable from the United States. Now let's take a look at a video by the Archdiocese of New York on the life of Pierre Toussaint and the example that he leaves for us.
Pierre Toussaint should be a saint because, as a man living in this world, his level of selflessness is one to be recognized and one to be emulated. We look to saints and wonder how were they able to continue in light of the adversity that they. Pierre Toussaint should be a saint because, as a man living in this world, his level of selflessness is one to be recognized and one to be emulated. We look to saints and wonder how were they able to continue in light of the adversity that they face. So why not give him that recognition?
Toussaint was born a slave on a sugar plantation in Haiti. When the revolution broke out there in 1787, his master fled with Pierre Toussaint and other slaves to New York City. His master apprenticed Toussaint to a hairdresser, and he rapidly became the most popular hairdresser in the city. Although Pierre could have bought his freedom at any time, he chose not to. Instead, he continued to help his master's family. He did, however, buy the freedom of his own wife, his sister, and other relatives. His mistress freed Pierre on her deathbed. Pierre Toussaint was noted for many acts of charity and mercy. He bought people's freedom, he gave money for good causes, sheltered orphans, and nursed the sick during a yellow fever epidemic. With the funds from his hairdressing business, he also helped restore St. Peter's Church after a terrible fire. He donated money to build the first St. Patrick's Cathedral on Mulberry Street.
Pierre Toussaint, amazing story. I was not familiar with Pierre Toussaint's story before. And I think learning about it really challenged me more to spread the amazing story.
His legacy in New York, where he has helped to transform lives, all of the disappointments he must have had, and the discrimination as a black man that he had, even in our own Catholic Church. He overcame that and not let that go deep inside his spirit.
This is the one who started the cause for Pierre Toussaint, Cardinal Cook. And this is Cardinal Klein is the one who brought his remains from down lower Manhattan to here. And what it had, obviously you could notice that he could have been placed over there in the corner somewhere, but Cardinal Klein would have been placed squarely in the center of what's happening. Whether it was the intention or not, if you're up at the top looking down into the crypt, he's really the only one you can see. A Haitian slave, still here, the only person who is not a priest, there's one Monsignor, I believe, but the only one who is not a priest is a Haitian slave. The only lay in here is a black man.
I went to Spelman College, which is a historically black college, and historically they don't have a lot of resources and funding to give students.
It is unbelievable how the program has grown and helped many people. In the beginning, when it started about 1983, great. We had very few people, very few scholars. But as the program developed, we saw it become more and more. The thing that I most admire about the program is the fact that the staff is keeping in touch with the students, that the students are keeping in touch with one another, that it's not only education oriented, not only looking at them in their professional life, but looking at them in their spiritual life.
Spain was amazing as a trip. I only knew in terms of like was close with one other person growing on the trip. So it was an opportunity to make new friends, to have spiritual experiences with new people. Can be scary, but when we got off the plane and saw everyone with their same like World Youth Day shirts, you just are not told by news or social media how many other young people are still heavily involved in their faith. It was so great meeting people from all over the world who not only thought very similar to us, but who I saw as opportunities to educate about Pierre Toussaint. Told our story about our patron. They were so filled with joy. It was amazing. It was like I was connecting with people who thought exactly like me, who wanted to do better for the world, who wanted to educate about faith and about becoming something greater than we are. There were great moments of prayer together. There were wonderful moments of tears, of just being in a space where you're allowed to release all the things that you're concerned about, worried about, things that you hope for. A lot of people had a lot of epiphanies about the root of some of their frustration, the root of their joy.
I think Pierre Toussaint's legacy lives on through programs like the scholarship program of Pierre Toussaint. I think it's up to us, alums and current students who are in the program now, to make sure that his legacy lives on.
His legacy continues in 2016 with so many talented and really powerful scholars.
His remains right there in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Look what God has done. Someone that you may have shunned, and look where God has placed them. And look how we're talking about this man all these years later. His legacy lives on, and that spirit lives.
So that's a nice little synopsis of the example Pierre Toussaint sets and how he's impressed many people today in his perseverance, even though he was put in a place as a slave, but he did become someone quite great, and he was someone quite great, and he leaves us a great example of persevering past those times of struggle. Thank you for listening about Pierre Toussaint and his life. This concludes our lesson on him, and have a good day.